On this episode, we take a listener suggestion to reminisce about some crazy characters we've met in Bangkok.
So if you're like us and think one of Bangkok's best traits is its rich reservoir of interesting expats, you'll love this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 to live the dream. And that dream was to waste a year in Chiang Mai eating Sizzler and sitting at an internet cafe. So, dream achieved.
And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 20 years ago. Fell in love with getting a polite phone call every time my cell phone is due, so I don't have to remember myself. So I never left.
So you don't pay a bill until they call you?
Dude, I mean, I do have one or two bills that are automatic, like something like Netflix, obviously, that just happens, right? But yeah, my internet and mobile phone bill, I don't even know when they're due, and I never pay proactively, never.
Wow.
I just wait because the companies here are so nice and polite. You know, if your bill is like 1 or 2 days late, they'll just call you up and be like, sir, could you go to the nearest 7-Eleven? And I'm always like, oh, thanks. So I don't pay anything proactively.
You must not have had the same bill collecting experience that I did in Canada, because
well, I think it's different here.
They were not friendly.
I'm not paying late fees. Yeah, so this is different. That's my point. This is different than in the U.S. It's like a collection agency like calling you. It's like
right.
It's like legal. Here it's them just reminding idiots. It's just like yo fool. Your phone bill is due. And I'm like, oh, shit, thank you. So you've avoided that?
I just have it all connected to my credit card. So. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, some of my stuff I do, but that's mostly my Thai stuff I don't. That's interesting. Usually it's my international stuff that's just like recurring billing stuff.
Boy, we got off onto a tangent.
A huge thanks, by the way, to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a whole bunch of cool stuff, including our ad-free regular show a day early, behind-the-scenes photos and videos of our interviews, discounts on swag, which you can find on our website, and various other things that aren't available to regular listeners. But best of all, patrons also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and random topics. We just finished recording this week's bonus show, and we chatted about a patron-only bike video Greg made on a recent bike ride, a supposedly looming crackdown on illegal English teachers, and an email from a listener who gave us some valid criticism, which we always love to hear, as long as it's valid. To become a patron, head to bangkokpodcast.com/support.
I'm just going to start saying that next time someone criticizes me. You're like, that's invalid criticism.
I only accept valid criticism.
I remark that as invalid and disregard it. All right, guys. Well, we're going to keep it a bit light on this episode. And this show is actually an idea that came from one of our listeners. So Brad wrote in and he said, it's incredible the characters you meet in places like Thailand. Maybe you could each describe your most unusual acquaintances. So thanks for that idea, Brad. And it's a cool one because it made me think of an episode that Evo and I did back in season 2 called Do You Have to Be a Weirdo to Live in Bangkok? And our short answer is yes. Spoiler alert. At least a little bit, which I think is important because that means that anyone who stays in Bangkok for any amount of time automatically has one pretty big thing in common with any other person who stays in Bangkok for any amount of time. So Ed and I started discussing some of the memorable characters and funny situations we found ourselves in over the years, and I thought it would make a bit of an interesting discussion, and here we are. So not only for me personally, Ed, like I've met a bunch of weirdos and I have some funny stories and stuff like that. But I was surprised at how many times I came away from saying like, oh, that's going to be a crazy story. But the more I thought about it, I actually learned something. I learned something about myself. I learned something about my role in Bangkok and how I fit here. And I learned some, survival skills, I guess would be,
Yeah. No, I like this topic. I think the term weirdo is a bit harsh. I really think of it just as interesting people. So the two people who pop into my head, I would not actually call them weirdos. I would just say that they're interesting people, like fun people or weird people, or it's weird. Like weird. I don't know. Maybe it's different in Canadian thing, but weirdo is a little bit harsh.
That sounds like invalid criticism to me.
Well, if it's invalid, then of course you don't have to listen to it. You know what I mean. My old. I may have talked about this very early on the podcast, like way back in the day. But one of my theories about Thailand is that expats are just rarely boring.
That's a very nice way of saying weird. Okay, well, we'll agree.
Yeah, I don't like every expat I meet, but there's just tons of like there's just and what's the I don't even know what the right word is, because what I'm saying is, sometimes I go out and I meet a PhD, from Harvard who does developmental economics, in Southeast Asia, and I'm like, okay, so that's not normal,
but it's really neat.
It's it's interesting, but it's weird. It's different. It's funky. They have a different background than I do, But then then another night, it's like I'll meet like a British like soccer hooligan who's like just a crazy funny character, who's like extreme in another way, and it's just. It's not like I said, it's not like I like every expat, but it's just like I feel like there's a wide range of characters.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a never-ending churn of really interesting people with interesting stories from all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, some of them, to be honest, some of them are kind of interesting in a bad way, as in like, so some of the people I meet, I'm like, okay, I wouldn't want to hang out with this person. So I think I have talked before about like, meet like back in the day when I used to stay out late in the bars, which I don't do anymore. I'm definitely a late night person now. I just like watch Netflix or something late night. But back when I used to go to like late night bars, I would just meet the weirdest people. And one guy I remember telling me he was wanted for murder in Belgium. I remember this, and he's just telling me how he's innocent, but he's on the lam and he can't go back. And I'm like,
I'm on the lam, Shay. Was he wearing spats? Talking like,
and then another guy, which is even worse. I remember him telling me, just hanging out late night, 3 a.m. drunk with the guy. Hey, what's up? What are you doing? And and this guy introduced himself as a trafficker.
Like what?
And that's just a bad word. That
right.
And
you can't get a degree in trafficking. Right?
And so he must have noticed my face, and he's like, and he said something. God, what did he say? He said something like, "Oh no, not drugs or anything like that, just labor." I remember that's what he said.
Okay, thanks, buddy.
Just he's like, dude, you don't have to act so offended and everything. I'm just bringing in like poor workers who are going to be underpaid and exploited.
It's like the check bin, please.
Don't look at me like I'm a drug dealer or anything. So I think I mentioned those on the show before. So it's like, yeah, occasionally I do have these short-term interactions with bizarre characters like that. But there's some other people who I met more than once, who I connected with in some way. In some cases, they were like my friends, or at least people that I kind of liked, but they're just kind of larger than the life characters, or strange or funny in some way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The most memorable guy I remember of these type of characters was this guy. I'm going to call him Chandler. I'll call him Chandler.
Yeah, for sure.
And,
no real names.
He was just this big, loud American dude that had a big, loud Harley, and he loved to drink. And every party or event or wedding or whatever that Chandler went to, it was just a disaster zone. He was a wrecking ball. And one time we were at this event and he was wearing a jacket because it was kind of formal, and someone had dared him to flex like the Hulk enough that his clothes would rip, and of course he did. So he was like, "Rawr!" And his jacket split down the back, so he spent the rest of the event walking around with this tattered clothes on.
Oh, he burst his jacket. Wow, that's crazy.
Another time we were outside of a wedding, and he stumbled out, and he wasn't really drunk, but he was a little bit drunk, and he's like, "Okay, I'm out of here." And we're like, got onto his bike and started meow, meow, meow. And we're like, "Chandler, you shouldn't be driving. You're kind of drunk." And he's like, "No, I'll be fine." And I remember he looked at me right in the eyes. He put on his front brake and revved this big Harley, so the back wheel was like,
that's crazy,
just peeling out, smoke coming out, and he just looked extremely confident. and 100% sure of his skills on the motorcycle, despite him being a little bit tipsy. And his motorcycle was parked on like this narrow little parking pad that led onto the bigger road. And all he had to do was drive straight for about 8 feet and then onto the bigger road.
Oh, wow.
And he looked at me in the eye and he was just so confident and said, "Okay, I'm out." And he went forward, missed the road, and drove right into a giant bush off the side of the road. And
He was a giant.
that was the end of him trying to get home on his motorcycle.
No, so you don't know whatever happened to him.
No, and I talked to some people recently, and I was like, "Hey, whatever happened to Chandler?" And they're like, "I don't know. We lost contact with him, and he just disappeared."
I tell you, man, there's a lot of people like that. So, like so he kind of fits in the crazy character category. So yeah. I've got a parallel, another crazy character. Okay, so again, obviously can't name names. So I'm with one buddy of mine who I'm good friends with, and he wants to buy some recreational products, let's say,
like lawn darts.
Yeah, lawn darts.
All right.
And so he's got a connection. He's got a guy who's gonna hook him up. Now, this is, just to be clear, this is very, very light into the recreational material kind of thing. Nothing serious.
Kids
just
lawn darts.
Just maybe slightly over the line. But he tells me, he's like, "Dude, you want to come with? I got to go to this guy's pad. I got to go to his house. That's his thing. He doesn't come out and meet people. I got to go to his place. It's safer." So I'm like, whatever, because I'm with a good.
See my friend who never leaves his house. Like, yeah, I'm in.
Well, whatever. So I'm with this guy is a good friend of mine. So, and it turns out it was kind of in the boonies, not crazy. It's a little house, and we go in there, and it's just a wreck. Like
Okay.
it immediately reminds me of like college guys' apartments.
Oh yeah.
It just looks like it looks like a young dude's place with like shit strewn everywhere, like clothes on the floor, like empty beer cans, so it had that whole vibe. And he comes out and he's a super nice guy. I'll just say he was British, and just seemed to be super friendly, outgoing guy, and wanted to get us some beers. And so this was my first clue, other than the fact that his place was kind of a wreck. This was my first clue that he was not a normal guy. So, the place is a wreck. We go into the kitchen. There's shit all over the place, like dirty dishes, whatever. A super old fridge, like just an old ass fridge, like looked like something out of like the 60s,
Okay.
Right? But instead of like just opening the fridge, he grabs like this cane with like a plastic handle, and he hooks the fridge door and opens the door with the cane, then reaches in and takes the beers out.
Was he scared of a ghost or something?
And then shoves the clothes on. I'm like, dude, like what? Why don't you just grab the handle? And he's like, "Don't do that, dude. It's electrified. It's like shorted out." So it was like some old ass fridge that was busted, And so he's like, "Don't touch the metal. Do not touch the metal on this thing." So he's got like a plastic cane to open up the thing.
Nice.
So he is a purveyor of entertaining substances, right?
Uh-huh.
So you figure he's going to be a little bit on the edge, but he told us this kind of sad story of how his Thai girlfriend had broken up with him. So he actually said, like, even though I just met the guy, he was like saying how, like, "I don't have anything to do anymore. Like, I'm really lonely, And I happened to notice that he had a little like a pen. So I go over to the pen and there's a bunch of turtles in there. And I'm like, "Dude, like, you keep turtles?"
Okay.
And he's like, "Yeah." And he comes over and he starts showing us all the turtles. And a bunch of the turtles, the backs of the turtles were painted like funky, like psychedelic colors.
Okay.
And he was just telling us how he was like hanging out a lot and didn't have a lot to do because his girlfriend broke up with him, whatever. And I'm like, "Dude, so like turtles is your thing?" I'm like, "So what?" I'm like, "What's
Oh,
up?"
God.
I'm like, "So what's up with like painting the turtles?" I'm like, "But it was actually kind of cool looking, those painted." And he's like, at night I'm like, "So I got nothing to do, so I like to paint turtles and drop acid and then just have turtle races." I just like to have turtle. So he's like, "I just like to have turtle races."
So this guy would sit there just blitzed out of his mind looking at these turtles. He probably thinks they're moving like, "These turtles are fast, man."
He was just, I mean, the word character is perfect description of him. And I never got to know this guy well, but I did hang out with him a few times, and he's super nice guy. Like, just no problems with the guy whatsoever. But he was a character. He races painted turtles while tripping.
That must look pretty neat, though. I imagine. I mean, everything's already colorful and weird, and you've got this reptile. Are turtles reptiles?
If he doesn't prove, he proves that there's all kinds of expats in Thailand. Like you got, like I said, you got the PhD developmental economist, from Oxford or Yale or Harvard or wherever,
right?
And then you got the dude who's racing psychedelic turtles and
Chandler driving his Harley into bushes.
Right, exactly. You have monstrous guys with torn jackets riding Harleys.
Wrecking balls who copy the Hulk.
Right.
Well, the one that stands out for me is that this was back when I came to Thailand when I was 26, and I was probably here for a year, so I was probably 27, and I was still very much in the this is amazing and everything is cool. I was just nothing but fun and good times, and I didn't have a care in the world, and I was running around just having fun. And I remember I went down to Khao San Road with a friend, and we went to some restaurant. We met a bunch of other people there, and we were talking, and I was sat next to this guy, and I was asking him where he was from. And he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm from, I think it was Liberia in Africa."
Okay.
I was like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, I escaped Liberia because we had a civil war recently." And I was like, oh, okay, that's gnarly. What's going on? And he was telling me about how like half of the people in his village were shot at, some were killed. Some of his friends were abused and raped by the soldiers. And
oh my God,
one guy had his hands cut off, and he's like, so yeah, I had to escape. I jumped in the river and I hung onto like a tree branch or something, and I got it.
God.
And he was telling me like I was telling you my day. Like obviously he wasn't saying it wasn't no thing, but
right.
He was just he had totally come to grips with it. And here's me, this idiot 27-year-old Canadian farm boy, thinking that like.
But dude, let's be honest, Greg. Your life had been difficult up to that point.
I did go through some pretty cold winters, but and it really opened my mind to the fact that Bangkok had such a wide variety of expats with some crazy stories that I saw it as a real opportunity to learn and to expand my mind and to learn about the world, and what a cool place Bangkok was for that, because this guy's story was just like bananas. Like I would have read about that in a social science textbook in high school,
Right. No, that is fantastic. I almost, even though that's a horrible story, I almost wish I met more expats like that, because I tend to meet. I don't know. I'm more likely to meet the
turtle racers,
the PhDs types, or maybe. Well, the turtle racer was an exception, although he was a interesting guy, fun guy. But you're right in that there are people from all walks of life. Like expats are definitely not cookie cutter. Even though you might be able to put some expats into certain categories. Like there might be like the foreign CEO on an expat salary kind of guy in some executive apartment. So you could probably build some categories for expats.
Right.
There's military guys, right? There's the English teacher, beach bum, type. But the bottom line is there's a lot of different expats here from countries all over the world. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And they've all got a story. It might not be the best and most interesting story, but there's always something you can learn. And not only about them, but how you react from that, and you're like, wow, that sounds like a crazy place. I should go check that out, or oh, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, it's funny. So I want to mention another expat that I knew, who's also totally different from your story in a totally different way. So this is just a good sign of variety. So I would not call this guy a weirdo or even weird. He was just an interesting guy, a guy I became friends with from Sweden. Again, I'm not going to use any names. And he was a buddy of mine. I knew him for, I think, close to 2 years. I thought he was a great guy, good friend of mine. And he was a partier, so he was an interesting guy. He was full of life. He was kind of like almost like the cliche life of the party kind of guy. So whatever, he was just outgoing. A lot of people knew him. And at one point, since we were friends, he told me that he was in a little trouble back home, and he might have to go back and deal with some like legal issues. And it was kind of weird. But he was a friend of mine, and he was just saying, hey, I want you to know. And I remember him saying, like, I know this is weird, like, you don't want to hear it, but, like, I got into some trouble back home, and I might have to go back and like deal with it. And so it was awkward, right?
Yeah.
But what it turns out happening is a few months after he told me this, he ended up getting arrested. So I think he was down on holiday in Phuket, and he flew back into Bangkok. And in Bangkok, he was arrested by a bunch of Thai police. Like he told me, like there were a bunch of Thai cops there, and basically he got put into detention at immigration because there was some type of wanted notice for him from Interpol. So he was like wanted. He was being prosecuted in Sweden for some type of crime, and so I got a call from prison. From the immigration prison.
Did he get like one call and call you?
No, it wasn't like the one call thing. It was fairly loose. I mean, he had a Thai girlfriend who we could talk to, but he called me and and told me he was like, dude, he's like, remember I told you about this problem I had. I didn't think it was going to happen, but I got arrested here.
Oh, jeez.
And it was the whole thing was so painful and awkward because here's a friend of mine, so and I had to introduce him to a whole bunch of other people, and he seemed to be a good guy, and I think he was a good guy or is a good guy. But he had like past problems, like a past life, like shit caught up with him. And, I learned lessons from this because, I think it's, when you meet people when they're young, young people don't have a history, so if you, let's say you're in college and you meet a guy and you want to figure out like, what is his past like? He's going to say something like, oh, I was like the captain of my track team. Or I was the like Calgary chess champion in 8th grade. It's like what, when you're a kid, like you don't, you just do school. You just go to school and you play sports. There's no, no one's going to say to you, like, when you meet a guy who's 16, he's not going to say like, yeah, I spent 2 years in prison in Belgium.
Right. Like the boundaries of your crazy experiences are pretty small.
Like we probably think it's crazy, but when you're a kid, you don't do anything. Your parents protect you from
There's only so many nutty things you can get up to.
Nothing happens,
Like this one time, I snuck out at 3 a.m. and we went to the 7-Eleven, lit off some firecrackers.
Right, exactly. But what I learned from this experience is when you meet people older, they have a previous life. And it could be all kinds of things, like both good and bad. It's like when you meet someone in their 30s or you meet someone in their 40s. I mean, think about it. There's all kinds of stuff that could have happened in the past. And so during this time period that I knew him, like he was a good guy, and he ended up going back, like standing trial, getting convicted, and I think spending something like 18 months in a Swedish prison in quotes, in that it was pretty chilled out and like casual, and I think he was able to like take classes, and
nice.
He had access to like PlayStation and stuff like that, and he was emailing me and stuff, and then he got out, but it's still a big deal, it's a big deal.
Yeah, this cycles back interestingly to what I was talking about first, because when I came here, I was that young kid. Like the potential adventures that I could have had at 26, 27 years old are pretty limited. Right, I was
right.
a few years out of college, and I had a job.
But even by then, you could have been you could have fought in Iraq. By the time you're 28, a lot of guys go to Iraq. 20, 21, 22. So you could have done a tour in Iraq by that time.
Right. But you mix that with the fact that, like I said before, if you're in Bangkok, I mean, there's a greater than average potential of what we're used to dealing with back in our home cities.
Yes.
That you have either been through some crazy stuff, want to get away from some crazy stuff, or are even running away from some crazy stuff.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny because subsequently, I'm not really in touch with him anymore, although I think occasionally we do exchange a message. But back then, he actually said something to me later, and this sounds funny. This sounds kind of backwards, but he said when he came to Thailand, he was running away from this thing back home, but he said he really was trying to get his life in order. And I actually met him. He was actually a college student. So he was a little bit older, like in his maybe like mid to late 20s.
All right.
But he was trying to get a college degree. So it's kind of weird. So I guess in a way it fits the theme of the show, because normally you think of expats coming here to go wild. Like
Right.
his whole thing was, I got to go straight.
I got to settle down, so I'm going to Bangkok. Yeah, that is not something you hear often.
Right. Well, at least, maybe not settle down. Like I said, he was a bit of a partier, but he was trying to get a college degree. He was trying to do something productive with his life, but he had a past, and so I think he was probably around 28, 29, 30, and so by that time he already had a past that he was trying to fix.
Right, but like you said, if you meet someone in their 30s or their 40s, they could have just finished 20 years in prison.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So another just very quick example, just to give you an example, like another buddy of mine who I knew in a couple ways. I knew he was working as like a corporate trainer guy. He was probably in his 40s, maybe early 50s. Very entertaining guy, good storyteller, kind of comedian type. And I heard him tell a story once where he was talking about being in the British what Air Force or whatever the British call it. We call it the Air Force.
I believe it's called the Air Force.
right, whatever, the Royal Air Force, whatever.
Apologies
but
to our British listeners.
He was in like the Falklands. He was like in the Falklands conflict, and he had a crazy story of being, I guess, not really an air traffic controller, but whoever the guy is on the ground talking to the jet fighters, whoever that guy is.
Right.
And he's got a crazy story of a British guy who was in a dogfight, like in his plane, and he's talking to him, and this guy lost one of his engines, and it was straight out of a movie, Wow. And so he has this whole former life. I think being in the British, technically, I think he was in the Navy. So I think it was a Navy pilot. So if I remember correctly, it's the British Navy, sorry. And so he's got this whole former life, like when he was in his 20s, where he was in the British Navy.
Yeah, that's interesting. And the longer you're here, you tend to meet people your own age. So I guess the greater potential for you meeting people with even wilder and zanier backstories.
That's right. I mean, I guess I feel like I tend to do like one thing for a long time. I've been in my university for 12 years, So I feel weird when I bump into people because a lot of times, they're talking about their kid who's going to high school or college or whatever, or, they're working this new job, and I'm always like, same old, just working.
Did I ever tell you about the guy who had to open his fridge with a plastic cane?
Right. So I feel like I'm doing the same thing, but you're right. Like, just the older we get, the older the people are that we meet, and so there's just more chance that they have more history and have done crazy shit,
right?
That you would never think. So you meet someone, you're hanging out with them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I used to be in the British Navy." You're like, "What? What the hell are you talking about?"
Right. And it's just as as we're wrapping this up, it's just, I remember one time a few years ago, I sat down with some guy and sitting down with some friends, and they said, "Oh, this guy's Sven or whatever his name was. He's from Europe somewhere." and I was like, "Oh yeah," just the general chat. And it came up, and it was just like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I was like, "Oh, I work and do this and this and this, nothing exciting." And I was like, "How about you?" And he's like, I'm a rocket scientist." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, I work for the European Space Agency. I design the rocket trajectories."
Oh, wow.
I was like, "What? Like, this is incredible." And so, my ears pricked up, and we had this amazing conversation, and he was just talking about this stuff that he thought was really boring. But I'm like, I'm talking to a rocket scientist.
No, I'm telling you, I meet people like that all the time. That's my point. It's like, to me, it's, again, I don't like all expats. Sometimes I meet expats who are screw ups or whatever, but it's true that they are just rarely boring.
That's right.
They're either interesting in a good way or interesting in a bad way.
So the thesis that we can take out of this episode, Ed, is that I think we need in the pursuit of research, we need to spend more time out and about, having fun and meeting people.
Well, it's true. I mean, I think you were definitely much more of a connector than I was, but no, it's not that I don't go out anymore. But I think what I've noticed as I get older is I have my spots that I just go back to. It's like I've got a winning formula. Like, I've talked about it on the show, the blues bar, the film club. I don't often just explore new places. Maybe that's the New Year's resolution.
It is a bit depressing because I was in a place a few weeks ago with a friend out in the evening, and I was walking around, and I was like, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I probably would have known most of the people in this place. And now I don't know anyone.
Well, it's impossible.
Yeah,
It's
man.
impossible as you get older. But, for example, that place that we found on the river Ban Rin Nam, you and I do occasionally discover places that are at least new to us. And I think we need to do it more.
I agree. And so should you, listeners. That's what makes Bangkok such a rad place. If you live here, get out and explore, get out and meet people. If you don't live here and want to come here when all this bull crap is over, yeah, man. I mean, take advantage, bite a big chunk off, get out there and start meeting people because Bangkok is such a great place for it.
Remember the old saying, patented, trademarked by the Bangkok podcast.
If you're bored of Bangkok, the problem ain't Bangkok.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So thanks for that idea, Brad. That was an interesting discussion. I think Ed and I are probably going to continue this at another time over a beer.
A bunch of stuff that we couldn't talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, there is. So thanks for writing in, buddy, and thank you for listening. So with that out of the way, let's get into some love, loathe, or live with, where one of us picks a particular aspect of life in Bangkok, which we then discuss and decide if it's something we love about living here, loathe about living here, or have come to accept as something that we just have to learn to live with, no matter how we feel about it. And this week, it's my turn to quiz you, Ed, but I'm not sure if you're going to know this one.
Okay. It's funny. I this fits with what we were just saying. Personally, I don't think I'm really that adventurous. I like to hear stories, but I don't try new stuff all that much. So I might not know what you're going to ask
about. So it's going to be something like, what do you think of Pizza Company pizza?
That I can expound on that.
All right, I'm going to say one word, and you have to let me know if you know what it is. Yakult.
Wait, what? Say that again?
Yakult. Yakult. You know what that is?
Why do I know what that word? That word totally rings a bell, but off the top of my head,
is those tiny little bottles of orange sour milk stuff that you can buy in 7-Eleven.
Okay, so I know. Okay, yeah, so I know that word. Okay, this is a good example of something I think I tried once,
really,
and didn't like.
Really,
yeah. So So, but I can't say I'm some kind of expert. I remember like back in the day, like wondering what the heck is that stuff, and trying it. And I'm like, oh, whatever, and just whatever, don't like it, and then never tried it again.
Well, for those that don't know, the Yakult and other products like it, there's some Thai versions too, I think, but this one is Japanese. It's about the size of a big shot glass, and it's a little plastic bottle with a foil lid, and they're delivered all over the city, all over the country, by this army of usually women. I've only ever seen women do it, and they deliver bags of these things on their motorcycles. And I'm actually convinced that if Yakult wanted to take over, they could get all these women together and give them weapons and just...
That's funny.
Like
Wait,
Fight Club.
Is that a brand name or a thing? Because I just know that word.
Well, here we go. Yakult is a Japanese sweetened probiotic milk beverage fermented with the bacteria strain Lactobacillus paracasi. It is sold by Yakult Honsha, based in Tokyo.
Okay, so it is actually a brand name. So I did know the brand name. Right?
Yeah. Ingredients are water, skimmed milk, glucose, fructose syrup, sucrose, and live Lactobacillus casei shirota bacteria.
Yeah, it's kind of sweet and sour, and yeah, I didn't like it.
I love it, man. I love it. I would drink,
oh, really?
I would drink a big gulp-sized cup of that stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I would say loathe. Maybe I have to say loathe because I remember trying it and being like, that's not my thing.
It tastes like orangey flavored milk with a bit of tang to it.
It's just weird, dude.
Well, we're all about being weird, right? I love Yakult.
I'm gonna go live with, although I guess I'm bordering on loathe in that I tried it and didn't really like it. But yeah, it's a cool thing. And I don't know how I know the word. Like I must have just come across it. But yeah, I'm very familiar with that phrase, but I couldn't place it.
Yeah. All right. Well, next time you have some, you can save it and give it to me because I'll drink it.
For sure. You can have it. Alrighty. A final thanks to our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping support the show. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
Yes, and you can also listen to each episode on YouTube. You can chat with us online, or even reach out to me directly on Twitter, where I am BKK Greg, Instagram too. So thanks for listening, everyone, and take care out there, and we'll see you back here next week.
Test, test, test. Hello, hello, hello.
Really loving my brand new lava lamp that I got off of Lazada. Oh, it's hot. For like $5.
It's cool,
Right.
man. I think it looks cool.
Brings me back to my childhood. Now I'm just counting down days until my son accidentally tips it over and breaks it all over the floor. But on the plus side, I'll get to find out what's inside a lava lamp. So. Yay for that.